What's going on, everybody? Mortem here, this time bringing you some honestly pretty depressing news that I kind of just wanted to talk about, really, and that is, as the title probably would have told you, the first Berserker Khazan's dev team is being, not exactly dissolved, but reorganized, which was already pretty, I would say, disappointing news to me personally. If you didn't watch my review for that, I really had a great time with it. It was my fourth favorite game of 2025, and I really feel like it did not get the accolades it deserved, quite frankly. And then, over the past couple of days, we've seen a little bit of an odd situation play out where, truth be told, I think it's a situation where everyone might be telling the truth. It just comes off a little strange. But also, on April 1st, ironically, April Fool's Day, the first Berserker Khazan got what is very likely going to be its final patch, which just fixed a handful of bugs, but also gave a sort of anniversary gift to people, which is a bunch of free armor, basically cosmetic armor and weapons that you could equip and play through the game with a really fancy skin on, that kind of thing. And it's pretty cool looking stuff, and while that was a bit of a strange day to release that, obviously this more recent news kind of makes that make a little more sense. So, a few days ago, just to get the actual news part of this completely out of the way, Nexon, the game's publisher, announced that its subsidiary, Neeple, was being put onto different projects. So, from what I understand, nobody lost their jobs here. They were simply reorganized and redistributed to other ongoing Nexon projects. Now, initially, this was reported as being due to the first Berserker Khazan performing underwhelmingly in terms of sales. And while we do know from its release that it did well critically in terms of, how it was received and people enjoying the game, it did apparently miss some amorphous sales target that we were never made privy to. And so it sounds like it was a game that did well, again, in terms of reception and everything, but probably wound up costing a little too much to make. And so it never quite made the money they wanted it to, which of course then brings us to this reorganization. Now, honestly, I think that probably sums up what happened, but then literally yesterday or so from the time of this video, we got a bit of an odd follow-up where a spokesperson from Nexon came out and mentioned that the reorganization had nothing to do with the game's sales or performance, but rather they simply needed these development resources on other projects now that the first Berserker Khazan had pretty much wrapped up. And that sounds exactly like the type of corporate PR statement a corporate executive would make. And in this particular case, I am inclined to believe that this is probably a situation of two things can be true at the same time. If I had to guess, Khazan did underperform, and so they aren't wanting to allocate any more resources to it, and they probably really do need those development resources on other projects. Those two things are not mutually exclusive. Now, if you're me, and if you haven't gathered this from the context of the video already, I thought the first Berserker Khazan was great, and seeing its dev team kind of splintered off and shifted in different directions sucks, because I think they could have followed this up with something even better. So this was terrible news to me personally. And yet, I should probably start this section off by simply saying that I am a realist when it comes to money and capital. You may or may not be aware that I used to work in sales and stuff before I started doing YouTube full time, and simply put, things have to make money. I think there are good and bad ways to do those things personally, but ultimately, these are products being made, they have to make their money back or they're just not going to get made. That's the way that goes. And it's certainly fine to sit on the internet and wax poetic about how, things shouldn't be done purely for profit and rather for the art of them, all of that stuff. But at the end of the day, these things have to make money, and that's just the way it goes, and complaining about that online isn't going to change that. This happening to this dev studio is unfortunate, but, hardly the first. Happens all the time in the game industry, and if anything, sometimes you put out a great product that does really well and meets its sales targets and you still get fired. So at least these people didn't lose their job, I suppose. But outside of that being just a generally terrible situation, sure, I did want to just kind of take a minute to talk about this because Khazan was such a great title. Khazan was a Souls-like that reminded me why I liked Souls-likes. I would hardly consider myself to be like an OG Souls-like fan or anything, but I enjoy them. I've played quite a few, more than most. There are dedicated YouTube channels who have played more than me. I absolutely know that for sure. But I've played a lot of of them, and the first one I actually played for myself was the original Dark Souls, on a version of it that isn't even available for sale anymore. And while that is a game with plenty of flaws, it's also really fun at its core, and I think there's a level of challenge there where you kind of learn how things work and get over them, get past that challenge, and it's great. And the problem is, if you play enough Souls like that, kind of feeling goes away and it becomes more of an, oh good, I'm past this and I don't have to do it anymore. Basically, it's just a situation where you can play a little too much of something and it becomes a little less fun because you've done so many of them. And yet, every once in a while, something comes along and is, the thing that reminds you of why you enjoyed it in the first place, and that is what Khazan was for this genre for me. I think it makes a lot of wonderful little intuitive changes to the Souls-like formula that make it a little more respectful of your time, lets you kind of constantly progress even when you're failing, and in doing so, it kind of rewards that failure not only in the experience of the things you've just learned, but literal experience to keep you leveling up and growing stronger as you sort of beat your head against that wall sometimes. Combine that with a whole bunch of well-designed boss fights that genuinely felt fair. There was not really a single time I died to a boss in that game and considered it anything but my own fault. It was challenging in a way that respected you, the player, and that's why it resonated with me so much. And honestly, that's kind of all I wanted this video to be. I just wanted to take a moment to kind of tell everybody about what happened, of course, but also point out that a great game, I think, was treated a little unfairly, which is hardly news in the video game space. Happens every day, to be honest. But between this and not even getting a Game Awards nomination for Best Action title last year, and I think this game was just very underrated with everything that released last year. And while I certainly don't think it's a perfect game, it had its own flaws and things, and there's certainly stuff I would like to see them expand, but I do think this game was great and it deserves better. Now, supposedly there are 2 more games in the works for this franchise, but we don't necessarily know that those will be follow-ups to Khazan or something else entirely. They also specifically mention that the team members they moved off of this onto other things are going on to support things like live service operations. So even though those other games are still planned, it sounds like it's going to be a pretty different team making them at the very least, and so even that I don't think is really the solace that one might hope that it was. But altogether, I just kind of would make this video to express some of those sentiments. I think if anything, people would probably expect me to do exactly that for things like CRPGs and stuff, but I, again, just enjoyed this game so much that I thought it was important to mention this, and hopefully you got something out of that, I guess. But honestly, bit of a bummer. With that in mind, if you played this one, or if you pick it up and happen to try it, that kind of thing, I would love to know what you think of it, which of course means to like, comment, subscribe, all that YouTube jazz. But regardless of any of that, truly, just thank you so much for watching. I really do appreciate it. May you wander in wisdom and have an amazing day.